Now, what I'm about to say shouldn't be a controversial thing to say, and the only reason it is because we live in a hopelessly dysfunctional society. And that is, masculinity is not toxic, and that men and women should not be in opposition to each other as our social narrative exudes. Moreover, the social and institutional disparagement of masculinity is not only damaging for the individual and society at large, but helps set up the necessary evolutionary cul-de-sac that our civilization currently finds itself in. In that, our current social paradigm in the West rests upon the assumption that a feminized society that can and will rid itself of what is generally referred to as toxic masculinity is not only desirable, but is inevitable. The continual denigration of the masculine is not only fueled by the noxious cocktail of academia and over-socialized groups blissfully resting in the bosom of a once powerful civilization currently running on fumes, but is also solidified in the oft-heard mantra and the ubiquitous chants to dismantle all of the institutions of the West and to squeals of smash the patriarchy. Now, the only problem is, the only stumbling block, I might add, would be when looking at human civilization from Babylon to our own, the demise of the masculine is also accompanied with the demise of the civilization. And the reason for this is that men no longer have any incentive or stake in upholding it. Unfortunately, for those that subscribe to the current anti-masculine narrative, the dreaded patriarchy historically has been shown time and time again to build and sustain societies, and without it, the needed conditions for civilizational collapse are planted and germinate. And we're going to find out why in just a few short minutes.
Did you know that reality is an illusion? Most of what you believe is the result of psychological operations by corporate and government personnel. Protect yourself from these psychops. Buy this unique t-shirt today and let the world know your mind is free and that the brainwashing has failed.
Candace Bushnell, the writer of the popular Sex in the City books and their TV spin-off, inspired and taught a generation of women that they could have it all. However, in 2012, she divorced her husband, and subsequently, the author has recently admitted that when she reached her 50s, after extolling a life of sex and loose relationships, that she regretted choosing a career over having children, as that now she is truly alone, and that being alone has made her realize the importance of starting a family. Being an influencing matriarch now for generations of women, she is emblematic of these women across the Western world and how illusions peddled by ideology based in shallow premises have hollowed out many women's lives across our society, and at least she recognizes it and is brave enough to admit it. But being a multimillionaire might help, and I doubt though, however, many of the single women that she helped influence to follow her down this road will ever, at the end of it all, wish that they could have just given one more PowerPoint presentation rather than have the warm embrace of family. While there are those that speak of a history of matriarchy in civilizations, the only real examples that one can find today are small, mostly primitive tribal groups living in jungles or in mountainous areas scattered around the planet. Groups that only the most obsessive anthropologist has never heard of. The Garo, the Bribri, or the Akan, for example. But I would wager that most people have heard of Greco-Roman, Persian, Islamic, Sino, Japanese, and Western civilizations. Whether we like it or not, historically at least, human civilizations have been created almost exclusively along patriarchal lines. And I have spoken on this subject before, and of course it does prove to be controversial as well as emotional, as many see any interaction between the genders as a zero-sum game. If we're not identical, then there must be one that is superior and one that is inferior. The entire concept of men and women using their own strengths in unison to help shore up the weaknesses of the other is completely lost to those that have swallowed the postmodern delusion that masculinity equals a toxic narrative. The current push of the ideology of radical feminism in the current year and for the past several decades is, when boiled down, not only about equality, but when enacted, sees birth rates plummet as motherhood is abdicated in favor of career and of material possessions. This is not in dispute. But more damaging is that it also sees women attempt to express themselves in sexual ways that mimic men's instinctive reproduction strategies. And what this narrative has accomplished is it's now left several generations of women cratered, disaffected, childless, and alone. Women are not men, and vice versa. This current in vogue ideology, and mantra I should say, rests upon the faulty and ill thought out premise that a more feminine society is not only healthier, but will create a more egalitarian world, a utopia somewhere over the gender rainbow. Our academics, cultural influencers, as well as our media have continually drilled down into the populace at large that masculinity is toxic and that patriarchal societies that masculinity creates are equally contemptuous. But when looking at the human experience and our history as a species, nothing could be further from the truth. And this is not a diatribe of men being better than women or vice versa. It's about what has consistently worked for humans across time and what hasn't. Put very simply, the world is not black nor is it white. Patriarchal societies are societies that are centered around family and children. Patriarchal societies are created in struggling times and is in fact a system of organization that centers on group survival rather than the desires of the individual. Conversely, matriarchal or feminized overtures towards society, which incidentally can only be observed in hunter-gatherer or subsistence-level tribal formations, or, coincidentally, at the very end of a long and bountiful period in the life cycle of a civilization made strong originally by patriarchal principles, are not centered around the family and children, but quite the opposite. There are other examples of hybrid systems, of course, in places like Africa, South Asia, or the Caribbean, but inevitably, none of these societies are particular models of success. Currently, those that are pushing for a more feminized society attempt to explain to the wider public that they must believe that feminism only equates with equality. Moreover, they continually explain, or attempt to bamboozle, I would say, society in general, that equality means equality of outcome, rather than equality of opportunity, equality before the law, and equal human rights. A very good example of this, of equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity, was made by the poster of the feminist movement, and that is the current Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who via his luxuriant hair and skills as a former substitute drama teacher beguiled the Canadian female vote and famously stated that his cabinet, which he made gender equal to the thunderous applause of the Twitter mobs and woke corporate mainstream media, well, this was done despite the fact that the elected female members of parliament only made up 26% of the House. And it didn't matter that this was the case because in the current year, he was demonstrating that equality of outcome is the highest virtue of a matriarchal and feminized society. However, what we do know is that clearly patriarchal societies are successful as those organized around the principles it espouses. Family, fertility, and children are the societies that have come to dominate our planet. The civilizations that are rooted in Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Confucianism, Judaism, all of these are patriarchal. So too are the religious traditions of Sikhism, Shintoism, and Jainism. Even Buddhism, which is practiced and packaged for Western audiences as rational, modern, agnostic, and liberal in matters of gender and sexuality, has at its core systemic patriarchal deference, which is traditionally attributed to the Buddha himself. All of these religions and the cultures that they have spawned have been created and nurture the principles within and stress the need for female obedience to her husband, but very crucially, the male responsibility to his family. A society that has a significant percentage of single parents, for example, single parent homes that is a clear indicator of the demise of patriarchy within said society. Now, the outcome, as we know, of children from single parent homes is statistically much worse than that of children from intact families. This is just a fact. In the United States, for example, but this goes for almost all Western states, 65% of African American children, 41% of Hispanic children, and 24% of white children, as of 2018 statistics, are growing up in a single parent home. Now, looking at our own increasingly feminized society, filled with women that will never have children, or the increasingly feminization of much of the soylent generation of young men, it's clear that a feminine society is not centered around family or children. Because again, humans evolved over tens of thousands of years, with men protecting their families and tribes, while women sought protection and nurtured their families and tribes through their own contributions. Put simply, the health of any tribe or of any society can really be measured by one thing: its position on natalism. Is the society creating children? Does this society have a future? Because societies that aren't creating their own replacements do not. Now, patriarchy is pro-natalism as it is centered around children and promotes human reproduction. Modern ideological feminism is conversely, however, profoundly anti-natalist. It seeks to smash the patriarchal, or what they believe is the Western sexist world order. And with the erosion of traditional social morals spurred on by shifting gender roles and the belief that empowerment and emancipation comes with childlessness, well, that society, or tribe for that matter, is obviously not one that is healthy. In sum, what we currently have is a societal organizational system in the Western world that is standing in opposition to children and the family. And this order and this organizational system quite literally has no future. Now, to be clear, this does not mean that women or the feminine are equated to these ideological values, but it is in fact the value system propounded by those that rail against the gender and sexual constraints placed on it by a patriarchal society. What this is saying is that any culture that organizes itself around anti-natalism is at very best maladaptive. The principles of child-centered, strong, monogamous families have been the building block of every successful society and civilization in human history. To work in opposition to these values, as modern ideological feminism does, is hence not only maladaptive, but will lead to the inevitable downfall of any society that adopts these values, for the simple reason that it will fail to reproduce itself, as we are currently seeing in the West, and I should also say in the Far East. And the fruits of our nihilistic, self-centered, anti-natal society are on display for anyone with even a casual interest in how societies fail, and these are easily recognizable. And I should say that when I say fail, I'm not talking about the end of civilization or the end of humanity, but a transformation will happen one way or another that will bring about the end of the current zeitgeist and a return to patriarchy, one way or another. It should also be noted that even though we are witnessing a breakdown, obviously, in our current mode of social organization, these things don't happen overnight, nor does a major, hard, fast collapse seem as something that will occur in the very near horizon. Now, given the loss in faith in nearly every institution, there are many that hope for a crash of some sort, but systems like ours are so integrated and in such a web that I don't think there will be a great collapse of some kind in our lifetimes. Mostly, what I believe will happen is a slow, painful burn in which many of the sane of our society are driven mad by this societal cul-de-sac that we find ourselves in. Even the Roman Empire continued on in some fractured ways, with the capital moving a few times and remains of its glory being dispersed throughout its former colonies. What this presentation is not about is giving any kind of hard forecasting or timelines, but a thought exercise at looking at previous human civilizations and the life cycles of them, and then comparing and contrasting our own, as well as looking at how the pendulum swings historically. Patriarchal societies have been the most successful model of human organization for a host of reasons, including male investment and access to their offspring and the benefits children receive because of it. Moreover, since the 1970s, when women were convinced that a career was a better life path than that of being a mother, well, report after report after report on the well-being, happiness, and feeling of satisfaction in Europe as well as North American women has plummeted. In some, the ardent belief that masculinity is somehow toxic is an evolutionary cul-de-sac, because allowing women the freedom to focus on producing and caring for children has always benefited society, and it would seem that women that have grown up on the social narrative of the past several decades are now only awaking from the haze of disinformation and the ideological and genetic dead end that is our current societal zeitgeist. So going forward, one can only hope that women and men come to understand that via the countless centuries of different models of human organization that have been attempted, there is only one that has been shown to work consistently over time. Masculinity is no more toxic than femininity is shrill. Both are needed and complement the other, and both are needed when attempting to build a stable society. And this shouldn't be a controversial thing to say. The only reason it is because we live in a hopelessly dysfunctional society. So thanks very much for making it to the end. If you liked this video, please check to see that you are still subscribed, as YouTube has taken it upon themselves to unsubscribe people from my channels by the thousands without their knowledge or consent. If you'd like to help support this channel, it would be very much appreciated. Ways to do so are in the description below. Again, thank you very much for watching till the end, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.